Renaud. Well, welcome back. Thank you for coming back to the podcast. You have a new book out I am excited about. Tell us the name of that book and a little bit about it.
It's called Why You Feel the Way You Do. And it's been a real fun book to write. It's kind of the culmination of all the things I've been studying and looking at emotions over the last 50 years or so. It starts off basically with what are emotions? And there's just some really exciting new stuff coming out of affective neurobiology right now. Then I talk a little bit about simple triggers and some ways to quiet them, then more complex ones and core response patterns that you have, both negative and positive. And then it wraps up with the 3 key things that make a person happy in life, what positive psychology or the science of happiness, as it's been called, that's been actually just started right around 2000. In the last 20 years, they've been doing a lot of research.
Yeah. Well, we could all use some tips on how to be happier, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a popular section in the book for sure.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that it starts with what are emotions, because this actually just came up. I was doing some research for one of the episodes and it came up about how we intertwine emotions and feelings and that there is a difference.
Yeah.
And so, what's an emotion? What's a feeling? How are they different? That type of thing. So can we start there with what is an emotion?
Sure. And neuroscientists, they talk about affects, and affects are something that drive you to do something. They cause you to get up and take some action of some type. The most basic ones are sensory affects, heat, cold, pressure. And then, if you're cold, you want to get warm. If you're hot, you want to get cool. If you're being pressed on, you want to get away from it, right? And then the next one are what are called homeostatic affects. And these are things that cause you to take actions to maintain a balance in your life. Homeostasis is just a complex word for balance. So thirst and hunger would be the 2 basic ones. When you're thirsty, your body needs to check its water balance. Of course, hunger, you need some fuel for it. And then the emotions are kind of the next level up. And they've actually discovered 7 basic affects or emotions that we share with all the other animals. And the 2 that I found just the most fascinating as I was reading about them, one is called seeking. And all mammals have this desire to explore their environment. You see this most clearly in babies. If you look at babies or puppies or kittens, as soon as they can walk and move about, they want to explore their environment. They're checking things out, looking for things that are positive and negative. And that's actually a drive in us. And that's why we like hobbies. That's why we like to explore new things. When you go to a new building or you're sitting in a new auditorium, the first thing you do is you look around and check everything out. You just want to make sure you understand what's going on. That's an actually emotional or affect that's driving that behavior called seeking.
I want to stop right there if you don't mind, because I think this is really important.
Yeah.
The podcast is based on jealousy, anxiety, insecurity in relationships. Right. And I think it's really important for people to understand that seeking part, people looking around, wanting to see their environment, exploring, being curious, is actually a very basic human thing.
And not only humans, but all mammals share these circuits. So it's very deep in our brain. In fact, the next one, the play circuit, you can take these circuits like with rats and you can delete the top part of their brain, the thinking part, and they still have these motives. So it's very primitive part of our brain that we have. So yeah, I know it's kind of gross, but that's neuroscientists. They do things like that to kind of figure out what part of the brain things are located in, right?
Yeah. Wow.
The play one is actually how we learn social limits. And so mammals are social. And if you've ever dealt with a little kid, like I've got my 3.5-year-old great granddaughter that we watch, and they learn what too much is by doing too much. And you say, that's enough. Stop that. And play is an integral part of that. And again, it's all baby mammals, human babies, puppies, kittens. They love to play. You watch a goat dancing around out in the pasture, or even cows or horses or whatever. And again, part of that's how they learn social interactions. And as adults, we still like to play. That's still a basic circuit inside of us. It brings us pleasure to do that.
Enter the word boundaries, right? Like in a way, adults saying, hey, this is my boundary, so that somebody knows, you went a little too far, right?
Yeah. And as infants or as children, you're supposed to learn those through play and healthy play. And if you have reasonable adults, they'll set those reasonable boundaries, and you learn it at that time. And of course, if you grow up in chaotic environments, sometimes those boundaries get really confused.
Yeah, they're very blurry, and we're not really sure. Yeah. So then in a sense, not everyone, it's not like this black and white thing where we learn as children, this is a particular boundary, you don't cross this. This is a particular boundary, you don't cross this. For people, it can be different and across the board, right?
Of course, because as you develop and as the upper part of your thinking part of your brain develops, you have experiences, you develop beliefs and expectations about who's safe, who's not safe, what can I do, what am I able to do? And these circuits get interweaved in all of those upper parts of your brain, and they get changed. And they can be actually suppressed, or they can be take forms that probably are not healthy. Probably the saddest example are babies that come out of used to come out of Eastern Europe, and there were these orphanages where they were taken care of, except for just a bottle would be put, and they were never held, they were never talked to. So they were just left in the crib, they were fed, they were changed, but that was all. And as they were adopted, they all had attachment problems. So they failed to attach to the parents. So that seeking, in fact, there's two that bind us together. One is he calls it panic, sadness, or separation anxiety, are the names for it. So when you see babies, they have the separation anxiety, and so they'll cry for their parent. These babies would give up crying because nobody would come and answer them. And so that circuit literally shuts off because of their experience, right? Now, you can reactivate it if they get proper therapy and treatment with their parents, so they can learn how to attach. The complement to that is a circuit called caring. And so in what you see is the baby cries at the parent, that circuit gets lit up. And so you want to come and take care of it. And it's fun when you go to like a Disneyland or a park or something. If you watch a little kid fall down or something, look at all the other little kids. They immediately turn, that caring circuit pops in. And that's what binds us together as adults too. That interplay between separation anxiety, which now becomes sadness. When you lose something that's important to you, you feel sad. So it's that same basic circuit that's been, modified through all of your experiences and your beliefs and expectations. And of course, the caring circuit has to do with who is lovable, how can I love them, what's the appropriate ways. All that stuff kind of gets modifies it because the upper part of your brain now becomes kind of like the executive for those lower impulses. It decides, what do we do with those? They come up and we have this desire. So our experience and our expectations and our beliefs have now channeled what we're going to do in response to that. Just like when you're hungry, you're going to choose what to eat, right? You have this drive. I'm hungry. Well, shall I eat chocolate cake or shall I eat something healthy? What should I eat?
It makes me think too, because one of the things with jealousy and having those feelings come to the surface or those emotions and it feels, and what I hear a lot and I experience myself is it feels so out of control. Like I have no control over my reaction to this. And it's, as you said, it's like, trying to do the opposite. So in a way, it's like throwing that temper tantrum or doing that thing that gets us closer to whatever we want. Almost the difference of like, I'm hot, so I need to be cold. I'm uncomfortable. So how do I get comfortable? And those types of things.
And actually that takes us to the second danger circuit that we have, because separation anxiety is one, but the other one is danger, actual threats. And so there's actually a separate circuit for when we feel threatened. And with jealousy underneath it really is threat.
Ding, 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 ding.
I'm going to lose something that's important, or something's going to be taken away from me. I can't hang on to it. And of course, the complement to that is anger, and fear are both your two responses to threat. If the threat is manageable, I'm going to go out and attack it. If it's unmanageable, I'm going to run away from it, or I'm going to get away from it. And a lot of times we're not sure. So we have a mixture of anger and fear at the same time going on underneath.
Want to be part of the show? Head over to topself.com/podcast, scroll down to the Be a Part of the Show section, and hit the record button. Tell me what your favorite episode is and why you're loving it, and I might just put it on the show. Or you can find the link to record your message in the show notes of this episode or any episode of Top Self. I can't wait to hear what your favorite episode is and hear your voice on the podcast. Now back to the show. Oh, I love that. Okay, so I know a lot of it ties to animals too, and we act the same way. I remember having different responses, right? Sometimes I'm just super angry and people experience it like it's this out of body, like I'm such a mean person at that time, almost unrecognizable, right? I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I acted that way.
Right.
Because it's so out of character with so much anger behind it.
Yeah.
And then there are other times where it makes me, it would make me more sad, or it makes people more sad and they kind of retreat and they, kind of coil up. Wanting that reassurance from somebody.
Yeah, that's that sense of loss.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's almost like, do we think that we're going to win this battle by being more angry? Like, do we feel like this is something, we can win by being angry? Or are we so saddened by it that we feel like, oh, it's just overtaking me?
And I think it's important to recognize that when you're highly emotional, the thinking parts of your brain shut off. And you start to go back on basically automatic behaviors that you learned in the past, positive or negative, right? And so one of the things that's really important, and this is true in just anger management of all types, is you need to learn walk-away strategies. When you're angry, the first thing you got to train yourself to do, no matter how much you want to take action, is to shut up and walk away and let yourself cool down so that you can re-engage the thinking part of your brain. And if it's anger, that means you're feeling threatened somehow. So what is the threat? Did this person look at somebody else? Were they doing something that was neglecting me or that I thought was neglecting me? And really take a chance to look at what is the threat that I'm feeling here? And is that a threat that's here and now? Or is that a threat from the past that I'm just reliving because something reminds me of it? And you really have to be committed to that walk away and taking time to cool down. And then after you've identified where it's coming from, if it's here and now, of course, you take action. But if it's something from the past, then you need to go do some what we call processing of it.
Yeah, because when we just go off that natural instinct, whether like I'm angry, whatever it is, then we are really making a choice of, are we going to just go off our own animal instinct, as we would say in that situation, or are we going to use tools and techniques and things that will help us in that situation?
Right. And I think,
love it. Okay. So danger, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered all seven. So we talked about seeking, we talked about caring, we talked about separation anxiety, play, anger, lust, of course. Got to throw that in the mix. That gets activated at middle school, right? Everybody knows about that one. And those are the ones that basically bind us together and cause us to take actions to protect ourselves, to, become connected with other people and, have social interaction and that sort of thing. So, and I think it's important to understand that as you experience things, especially as you grow up, experiences and memories that have a high emotional content, that there was something important going on at that moment, they get an emotional tag. And so one of the ways that your brain sorts information is it puts emotional tags on things that are important. This is why experience is more important than book learning. I can sit down, I can read a whole bunch of books about driving a car, and I can understand it perfectly. But until I get behind the wheel and actually start trying to drive, that didn't work. Oh, this feels good. And those actions and those memories now get an emotional tag, and they all become part of your subconscious driving. Most of your day, you're unconscious. Most of the day, your subconscious is deciding all kinds of different stuff. You walk down just the street. Your brain is calculating distances. It's looking for objects. It's looking for things that might be threat or positive. And all this stuff is going on at an unconscious level that we're totally unaware of. We're busy thinking about, what am I going to have for lunch? Oh, gee, that show's on tonight that I want to watch, and your brain's taking care of everything else, which is good because it can do that. We can think about those other things, right? But then as soon as something that in the past has been tagged as important, either positive or negative, you'll become aware of it. And a lot of times you'll start to take an automatic behavior that you've practiced in the past, without even thinking about it. You're getting ready to trip. What's the first thing you do is you start to brace yourself. And then afterwards you say, oh yeah, I almost fell there. And so that's a lot of these types of responses come up too. And that unconscious part of it is really important to understand, because then you have to train yourself to, in the case of anger, walk away. And what I do with people is, this is kind of getting to a core negative response pattern, right? Is I'd say the first thing you need to do is have a simple definition or explanation of why I do this. And usually it's not a mystery. It's just that people waste a lot of time. They'll do it and they'll say, I don't understand why I do what do I'm doing it again. Why did I do it again? And they'll get on that why thing and they never take action. So the explanation is simply so we can move on and take some action. So a simple thing might be, my mom or my dad was a very jealous person and they were always screaming and, the partner or whatever it happens to be, right? But you have a simple paragraph and you memorize that. So whenever you start asking yourself, why did that happen? You say, oh, I understand why. This is why it happened. Next thing I have people do is identify specific places where they get triggered. The more specific you can be, the more successful you'll be. So I get triggered when I'm in a restaurant and the person thinks that what I'm eating is not the right thing to eat, or I get triggered when I'm with my kids and they do this action, or when my mate does this action. And the more specific you can be, the better you'll be. And then you start identifying what are some opposite positive behaviors I can practice. So, for example, if I tend to criticize my mate and my kids a lot, or my friends, what's the opposite of criticism? It's encouragement, right? So I need to start practicing encouragement, because somebody who's critical often is not a very good encourager, right?
Right.
And so I need to start practicing that behavior, and I need to start commenting, boy, I like the way you did that. Oh, that was, I appreciate that. So starting practicing that opposite behavior, and at the same time having this is the kind of the cognitive side of it, having things I can tell myself when these behaviors come up and I'm feeling this way, that would help to redirect my thinking into a more logical and positive way. And that becomes very specific to the things that a person gets triggered by.
And it can be so many different things for so many different people. I mean, I've heard a ton of different ones where it's just something really simple that somebody does, even in their daily lives, that can be triggering for somebody because they experienced it, or as you said, something happened and they slam that tag on there. Yeah. And now, it's something that maybe other people would see as just a normal everyday thing. And it's really triggering for people.
So maybe take a real simple example. A person I worked with once, when his wife would make suggestions, he would get really angry with her. And so we talked about it. Said my mom was always criticizing me. And my wife, when she says that shirt doesn't look good, or you might want to think this other color, it reminds me of my mom. And so he gets angry, right? And so one of the self-talks that he did was, she is not my mom. She is my mate. Yeah. She loves me. She is just trying to help me. She's not trying to put me down or criticize me. And that would be some of the type of self-talk that he used in that situation. And over time, he found that she no longer triggered him. She desensitized, and this is an important thing, when you're sick, hungry, tired, stressed. Because when you're sick, hungry, tired, stressed, the thinking part of your brain is not working well. And so you tend to go back on old stuff, and old triggers and stuff will tend to be more active at those times.
And just being a little bit more aware, as you said, like, okay, if something comes up, this is probably not a good time to say anything, because it's most likely there because of those things.
In fact, if you've been making a lot of progress and you notice some old things coming up, oftentimes that's the first signal that you're stressed out or you're sick or you're tired.
Interesting. Yeah. Yes. I talked about, my husband and I went to Costa Rica earlier in this year, and talked about how I had a little relapse of jealousy, and I was a little bit shocked by it, but it was one of those, I was super hungry. I was really tired. We had done a lot of things, all of these things kept adding up, and I knew, like, oh, right. And I ignored the signs, and then there you go.
Yeah. And, and that's something that people do so often is they get out of touch of when stress and just, daily life is affecting them. And it's important to understand, what are your personal alarms? What do you do? My dad was a sailor, for 21 years. And I used to joke that there's a change in how I use language sometimes. And that's an indication that, I'm starting to get a little stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody has their own particular things they do. I'll start playing some stupid game on the computer and just kind of wasting time, my mind kind of rolling around just because I'm on overload. So things like that, you identify, these are my personal stress indicators. These are the indicators that maybe I need to do some self-care.
I think it's really important to know your triggers, to learn your triggers.
Yep.
So that it makes it easier. The more you know them and the more okay, that happened, remind yourself that's just a trigger, as you said, using that, okay, this is because, my mom was really judgmental, whatever it is. Then it makes it easier as you practice that the next time it starts to then not become a trigger for you, because and even if it does a little bit, it's so much easier to just, swoop away of this is not a problem.
And you've just said an important thing, the practice. We read a lot of books about how I'm going to reprogram my mind. I'm going to delete that old program. That's not the way brains work. We are organic beings. We are not digital computers and phones and stuff. Memory and behavior works more like a muscle where you have to exercise it, as opposed to a program that you just delete and it's all gone. And even when you're successful at changing behavior, again, some of those old engrams and patterns are still in the brain. And when the right set of triggers comes up, sometimes they'll get fired. To use maybe a different example, a PTS example, a person I knew that had been in a bad accident, rainy night on a curve of the road. And, they got desensitized. They're doing fine. It just so happened several months later, she hit a curve of the road at a rainy night and it triggered because just the right set of things happened, right? The right combination of things came up. And occasionally that'll happen because those things are still down there somewhere. You don't delete them. You just basically cover them over with new, more healthy programs that will function most of the time. And I think, and understand that helps you to be a little bit more gracious with yourself, a little bit more forgiving when you do fall into old patterns, and recognize that that's just the way human beings are. And we do that.
Yeah. And that's what I tell people, you can't expect to say, I'm never going to feel jealous again in my life,
right.
But you can get way better and you can feel better and you can respond better.
Yeah.
All of those things, which then makes your life feel very different.
And the reward is, as you learn the new behaviors, that in itself is rewarding because you get the positive relationship and the positive stuff, which is really what you want. A lot of times a person who's jealous has not had a chance to experience really deep, healthy emotions. And so the only way they need to know how to get a piece of somebody is through negative behaviors. It's like when you teach parenting classes, you tell the parents, that child is going to get a piece of you one way or the other. If they don't get positive stuff, they're going to get a negative piece. And that's just the way people are, is we have those circuits where we want connection. It's important to us. And if I can't get or don't know how to get it in a positive way, I'll find other ways by being dependent, by being irritating, by being, powerful. We can go down the list of lots of ways that people will get something out of other people. But once you start to experience that healthy, deep, positive connection, you find, gee, this feels good. I like it.
Yeah. There's payoff to being jealous. As you just mentioned, I know there was probably times where I had a little jealous fit, as you said, to get attention, not meaning to do it that way, but that's the way it came out.
Or control.
To get that attention or control for sure.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, it feels so much better when you get those things the proper way, the healthier way. There's so much more to that than the 10 minutes of attention that you got from, throwing a temper tantrum.
And the contrast makes the negative behavior more distasteful over time.
Yes.
Because initially, it's all so it's, hey, this is okay. But as soon as you realize and taste a little bit of the opposite, then you begin to realize, this does leave a sour taste in my mouth, Yeah, I got that momentary thing, but it's, in the end, I'm not happy with it.
Mm-hmm. So true. I mean, being honest, I think that is part of the reason when my husband and I, when I was still in my, really jealous stage, after I started working on it and coming out of it, and then I would say, I'm going to get through this, moment of time without doing the thing that I was doing in the past, as you were saying, kind of retraining my brain, putting something new in place of that. And that feeling, you're right, of not having an argument that time and actually being able to stay and enjoy dinner and having a good night versus the argument that I would have had, ruin the night, going home, not speaking to each other. And so the more often that happened, you're right, of then making that choice of like, would I rather have a great dinner and a good time? Because that's been so much better. And then operating from that way.
And I think, as you're practicing that, something else that helps is to ask yourself, what do I really want here? I know with various types of anger management, that's the central question you ask once you start to calm down is, what is it that I really want here? Do I really want to show this person I'm right? Or do I want to have a good time? What is my goal right here?
Yeah,
for
sure.
Once the rational part of your brain kicks in, usually that's easier to identify.
Yeah. What else from the book can you share with us?
Well, it's these core response patterns, I think, are really important. Back in the 60s and 70s, the two big ones that were identified and are real big in education, one is learned helplessness. And again, the experiments were done with dogs, and you give them shocks and that they cannot escape from, and pretty soon they give up trying to escape. You put them into a new situation where they just walk away from it, but they don't even try because they've been programmed that they're helpless. And so they call that learned helplessness. You see that with people. You see that with kids that are in environments where they've been beat down or, they've just learned they can't win. You see this in whole society sometimes, in dictatorships and stuff where people just know they can't win. They come over here in a free country and they continue to act as if they're still in that environment. Learned helplessness. So that was a big one for education. Learned helplessness is one of those things that, again, education has found to be very useful in understanding why a lot of kids are underachievers and to try to break them out of that. And with people, one of the things you find is if they can have a success experience, that helps to bring them out of that. A long-term study I saw a long time ago that really impressed me is they took a group of people that had been severely abused in negative environments, and they looked at them as adults. And about a third of them were in various institutions and jail or mental or whatever. About a third of them were functioning marginally, and about a third of them were doing pretty well. And the third that were doing well, they had, this particular study, two commonalities. One was that they married somebody who came from a reasonably healthy background, so they could learn healthy behaviors. But the other one is somewhere in their life, they had a success experience. Could have been a school thing. It could have been a hobby. It could have been sports, their first job. But they had a success experience where they got the concept, I can be successful at least one thing. And with adoptive parents who have kids that have that learned helpless behavior going on, if you can give them some success experiences, that's one of the key things to help to bring them out of it. So they can get the concept that I can be successful at some stuff. The other big one back then was locus of control. People can have an inner or an outer locus of control. So an inner locus of control means I have power and control and I can make things happen. Outside means things just happen to me. I have no control. So a person gets a promotion at work and you ask them if they have an outer locus of control, or locus is just a fancy word for center. So if their center is outside of themselves, then they would say things, well, I was just lucky. I guess it was just, they needed somebody and they didn't have anybody else to look at. They'll say things like that. Person with an inner locus or center of control would say, well, I worked hard, and I deserve it. I'm a good worker and I think I'm going to do well at it. So they're going to look at it differently from the person from the outer. And again, someone who grows up in an environment where they don't have a lot of control, they'll have that outer locus of control. And so they don't see that they can affect anything. And so like with kids in school, they would say things like, oh, you got an F, or you didn't do well in that test. well, that's just the way it is. I can't do well. And the inner person would say, well, if I didn't really study, if I study harder, then I'll do better next time. So it'll be a different perspective on what success and failure looks like and why it happens. So those are the two kind of classic ones. And what I do is in the book is I say, okay, everybody has a whole set of these response patterns. And if you look at your background, you can figure it out. And they are both positive and negative. They have to do with yourself, with people, and the world in general. So things like with myself, I can succeed. I can't succeed. I'm a loser. Oh, I'm okay. I'm lovable. I'm not lovable. So, you have those types of things. With people, people are dangerous. People are okay. Conflict is dangerous. Oh, I can manage conflict. I have some tools. With the world is dangerous. The world is scary. The world has problems, but I can manage it. Things of that nature.
Right.
So I've got just a long list of things that people can pick from, both positive and negative. And as you identify them, it's usually doesn't take a lot of work to think about your past, to figure out where this particular message or response pattern came from. And again, you do the same thing. If you want to change it, you identify, okay, I have this idea that conflict is dangerous because every time I spoke up, bad things happened to me. So I learned to avoid conflict. Or if you're a fighter, you learn to fight, right?
Mm.
So this is where it came from. Here's where I avoid conflict. I don't speak up at work. I don't express an opinion when I'm in a restaurant. If I want to watch a TV program and my partner wants to watch something else, I will always agree to what they have to say. Okay. And then what are some opposite behaviors? Well, I can start to say, give an opinion and not apologize for it. I can express that, I really wanted to watch this program instead of the other one. I can start to work out some of these compromises. And then again, you have the different types of positive self-talk that you memorize. Conflict is not dangerous. Conflict is just means there's two different needs. And really, that's all. When you look at conflict management, one person wants one thing, another person wants another thing. Reasonable people are willing to compromise. Unreasonable people aren't. I mean, that's important to acknowledge that as well, right? If you're in a relationship with a reasonable person, which you may not be, they will negotiate with you. You just need to speak up and start to do that. It's okay to have an opinion. I'm worthy of having an opinion. So you come up with a list of things you can tell yourself and you start practicing the behaviors in simple situations, working up to the more complex ones.
I love the part where you said with people who have that, like the outer where everything, stuff just happens to me and the world is hard on me and the world is scary and the world is dangerous and people are dangerous. All of those things, I think that is very common, especially as I've seen of, people who are jealous in their relationships. They have a lot of that thinking sometimes. And that's where it's really important to know. And as you pointed out, like, there are ways, though, as you said, if I have the tools to handle conflict, then conflict isn't as scary.
Right.
And so a lot of times it's just people not realizing, oh, there are tools and there are things I can learn and there are skills that I can develop, that then all of that is not so scary anymore. And I don't feel like the world is just out to get me, so to speak.
And again, one of the core issues that frequently comes up is, as a child, there was no control.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have any power or influence. And so differentiating between now and the past, and you do this with a lot of different PTSD stuff, is today is different from the past. I have control now. I do have the ability. I'm a big person now. I'm not a little kid, and I can voice myself. I can walk away. I have all kinds of things I can do as an adult that I didn't have the ability to do as a child. And sometimes looking at it from that perspective will really empower a person too. I know with people that are abused, the idea that, the abuser is no longer present. You never have to be in that situation again. And again, indeed, you do have tools now because today is different and you are different. And you have the ability to think that a child did not have the ability to use. Their reasoning abilities aren't the same as an adult. You have experiences that they did not have. You have perspectives. You have all the stuff as an adult that you did not have as a child. So all I need to do is start using it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. You touched on personalities. It sounded like maybe you want to talk about that. Let's wrap up with personalities.
Okay. There was a study down in New Zealand in Dunedin, and it started in 1972, and they took every baby that was born for 1 year. So, all those babies, and they just start studying them physically, psychologically, socially. And as new things like, MRIs and genetics and stuff came out, they added that into the mix. So they've been studying this group of people for 50 years. And fascinating things have come out of this study, a lot of which were very controversial at first. But they found that by age 3.5, the kids, all of the babies, or now children, fell into one of 5 different groups, personality-wise. Okay. And they could actually identify it, and this maintained throughout the rest of the 50 years they've been studying them. And so your big group, about 40%, they call the well-adjusted. And so these are the kids that are kind of, they socialize well, they manage risk fairly well, they're fairly easygoing, and they grow up, unless they're in a really negative background, which you would expect as healthy individuals. Then you had, I call them the evil Knievel kids, right? The risk takers.
The daredevils.
Yeah. They're the ones that charge anything. They're running their skateboard down the banner, that as adults, they're hang gliding and, doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
Jumping out of airplanes.
Yeah, they're doing all the stuff you'd expect them to do. And, again, they do fine if they're in a reasonably healthy environment. And then you had about 15% were what they called shy. And they were slow to warm up to people, slow to go into things. And as a group, if they're in a reasonably healthy environment, they did okay. They were always going to be a little bit kind of hanging back, a little bit on the quiet side, but they can manage and do fine in life. And then the 2 groups that had problems were the extremely shy. And especially if they had a negative environment. If they were in a really positive environment, they could do fine. But they were the ones that were most vulnerable. And then there was the group they called the undercontrolled. And this is the group that had the most problems. In fact, they identified that with children, the one thing that you can give them is the ability to control themselves and exercise control. The old marshmallow test. I'll give you another marshmallow if you do not eat this one for 5 minutes. Yeah. And some kids gobble it. So that sense of being able to control and teaching them that at an early age really helped. And of course, if you had one of these kids in a negative background, they're your prisoners, your drug addicts, and that type of stuff as adults. Some of them turned out to be pretty good. And maybe to just kind of talk about the nurture nature thing. There was a guy who was doing studies on prisoners who were sociopaths, and he was doing all these brain scans and stuff on them. And just for fun, he said, I'll do my own. Guess what? He had the same brain scan as all these sociopaths. And when he started looking into his environment, he'd been adopted, as I believe. But anyway, he had all these murderers in his background. In fact, Lizzie Borden, the axe murderer, was one of his great grandmother or something.
Oh,
but he turned out really well because
he was adopted and had a different
and family that really wanted him. Wow. And he was loved. And he would say, I'm very competitive. I really don't like to lose. And I can sometimes rattle the cage, just to rattle the cage. But I'm learning now that I know my background to counter that even a little bit more, just because I'm proud of it. But
yeah, I'd be a little bit worried, like, oh gosh, what does that mean?
And it turns out that there's a lot of this stuff out in the normal population. And the difference, again, has to do with that early nurture nature thing. So just because you got some genetic programming doesn't mean it's you're destined to be a certain way. Certainly, the healthier the environment you're in, the more that'll counter that. And the negative the environment you have, the more it'll tweak that in a negative way. But again, we are malleable beings, and the brain continues to put new neurons down and to grow and develop until we die. That was one of the big discoveries of the early part of this century. Up until 2000, most people believe the brain, after you get through adolescence, middle to your 20s, it quits growing. There's no new neurons, and if you lose something, you lose it. But they started realizing when they started studying older people is, hey, you give new experiences, new neurons start connecting, new connections start happening. And so, you never lose the ability to learn and to change. Certainly it's a lot easier if you got a nice positive background to start with, more difficult if you got a difficult background, but change is possible. And like I said, that old stuff will come up when you're sick and retired or stressed out. So just be aware of that.
So what you're saying is it's never too late.
Yeah.
You can never be too old to make changes. You can still do it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find your book so they can start to make some of these changes?
Well, it's available Amazon, bookstores. It's in audio and ebook as well as the paperback. And actually, it's just hit Amazon. So yeah, just go in why you feel the way you do. You can also go to my website, whyemotions.com. So whyemotions.com. And I've got links to all my other books and my YouTube videos and all that type of stuff there. So
awesome.
Easy to find.
Well, I know that's a big question on everyone's mind, right? Like, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel the way that I feel? So great title, great book. Go out, get the book, and start making those changes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. This is always a delight to be with you. So.
You as well. Thanks.